We were prepared for tanks, missiles, and armies. What we weren't ready for was baseball bats wrapped in barbed wire and men who thought sleep was optional. The Dren Dominion prided itself on being the galaxy's greatest military power. For centuries, their fleets had carved through resistance with precision and brutality, claiming world after world. When their massive armada arrived in Earth's orbit, they expected another routine conquest. Humans, after all, were a relatively young species, still bickering over borders and technology, barely beyond internal combustion. The invasion commander, High General Carrix, anticipated victory in weeks, if not days. The initial strike was clinical, as always. Dren battle cruisers leveled strategic targets, military installations, communication hubs, and transportation infrastructure. Waves of drones were sent to pacify major population centers, capturing key cities with an efficiency that bordered on boredom. For the invaders, resistance was sporadic, as expected, and casualties among the Dren troops were negligible. Earth was falling, just as every other planet had before it. Then things started to change. It began in the forests of North America. Recon teams were sent to capture a small group of retreating human soldiers but failed to report back. A second squad was dispatched, their tracking drones picking up faint heat signatures in the underbrush. They vanished too. The third team found nothing but silence and a single drone feed showing an unsettling image, a crude pitfall trap lined with sharpened stakes, dripping with an ominous red liquid. The Dren weren't used to traps. They weren't used to subtlety. They weren't used to war being dirty. Carrix dismissed it as an anomaly. He shouldn't have. Over the next few days, the reports grew stranger. An entire battalion disappeared in the deserts of Australia. Their last transmission, shouts of confusion. The words, sandstorm, and ambush, barely audible before static. In the megacities of Asia, guerrilla fighters struck at night, blending into crowds by day, disappearing like ghosts. In rural Africa, Dren vehicles were found abandoned, their drivers missing, with crude but effective explosives leaving scorch marks across the halls. The humans weren't fighting like soldiers. They weren't following the rules of war. They were hunting, and they were terrifyingly good at it. It wasn't just the tactics. The humans themselves were wrong. Unlike most species, they didn't seem to value the safety of their own lives. While other conquered races had begged for mercy or capitulated when faced with superior technology, humans were a contradiction. They screamed with fury, fought with abandon, and seemed to laugh in the face of overwhelming odds. The Dren began calling them the unruly ones in whispered conversations. But the term didn't capture the creeping unease that was settling over the alien forces. Carrix ordered a full-scale purge, no longer interested in occupation or assimilation. If humans wouldn't play by the rules, they would simply be annihilated. Yet, for every village they razed, 10 more fighters seemed to rise. They called themselves resistance groups, the Wolverines, the Iron Fangs, the Sons of Liberty. Their insignias were crude, their weapons even cruder. Repurposed tools, explosives fashioned from fertilizer, ancient rifles that seemed more dangerous to their users than their targets. But somehow, it worked. The first major setback for the Dominion came during the siege of Moscow. It was supposed to be a simple operation. Dren forces had the city surrounded, its defenders outgunned and outnumbered. But as the alien soldiers advanced, the humans set the city on fire. The blaze spread faster than the Dren containment units could handle, turning entire districts into infernos. Human fighters, their faces blackened with soot, emerged from the flames like specters, wielding weapons scavenged from fallen invaders. They didn't retreat, they didn't surrender. They pushed the Dren back, street by street, block by block, until the once proud invaders fled in disarray. Carrix couldn't comprehend it. The humans weren't superior in strength or strategy. They were weak, disorganized, and outclassed in every conceivable way. And yet, they were winning. His frustration boiled over in a meeting with his top generals. These primitives lack discipline. They fight like animals, he roared, slamming a clawed fist on the command table. They fight like they have nothing to lose. One of his advisors murmured almost to himself. The comment hung in the air. Carrix dismissed the meeting, but the words gnawed at him. Perhaps that was the problem. The Dren fought for conquest, for glory, for expanding their empire. The humans fought for survival, and something deeper, something Carrix couldn't understand. As the weeks dragged on, the Dominion's advanced weaponry began to fail them. EMP mines planted by human saboteurs turned air-sleek drones into lifeless metal husks. Thermal cloaking devices were defeated by humans who simply smeared themselves in mud or waited motionless in the cold for hours. Even their food supplies became a vulnerability. Human hackers infiltrated supply drones, redirecting shipments to resistance groups or poisoning them outright. The Dren had never faced such an enemy, one who adapted so quickly, who turned every weakness into a weapon. And then came the event that shook the Dominion to its core, the fall of the flagship Velon, orbiting high above Earth. It was the pride of the Dren fleet, bristling with weaponry and protected by the most advanced shielding technology in the galaxy. It was deemed untouchable, a symbol of the Dominion's power, until it wasn't. Human hackers infiltrated its navigation system, overriding safety protocols and sending it plummeting into the Atlantic Ocean. The crash created a tidal wave visible from space, but the true devastation was to Dren morale. If the humans could destroy the Velon, what else were they capable of? In truth, the Dren were already broken before the flagship fell. The humans had shown them something they'd never encountered in all their conquest. The raw, unrelenting chaos of a species that didn't just resist but reveled in defiance. The humans didn't just want to survive. They wanted the Dren to regret ever setting foot on Earth. Carrick stared out of the observation deck of his command ship, watching as yet another one of his transports exploded in the atmosphere. His claws twitched at his sides. He had underestimated these creatures. They weren't just another conquest. They were something entirely different, something the Dominion might not survive. Carrick tightened his grip on the edge of the observation console as the flicker of another destroyed cruiser lit up the distant atmosphere. His claws left shallow gouges in the metal, a reflexive expression of mounting frustration. The humans were winning battles they had no business winning. The Dominion's calculations, their endless simulations, had never predicted this level of resistance, let alone the possibility of outright defeat. "Commander, we've intercepted another transmission," one of his subordinates reported, standing rigidly at attention. "The humans are boasting about the destruction of the Velon. They're calling it, what was the term? A warm-up." Carrick turned slowly, his amber eyes narrowing. "A warm-up?" The subordinate nodded, his scales paling under the general's glare. "Yes, sir. They've broadcast the claim across all frequencies. Some of our troops have started refusing assignments near their territory. Fear is spreading, fear among Dren warriors." Carrick bared his teeth, his frustration boiling into rage. Fear is a choice, and it's one they don't have the luxury of making. "Increase the rotations, reassign them if necessary, but I will not tolerate this insubordination." The subordinate bowed quickly and left, leaving Carrick alone with his thoughts. He had seen countless battles, crushed innumerable civilizations. Fear was always an early sign of collapse, and that collapse would ripple like a disease if left unchecked. The Dren were proud, disciplined, yet even they were faltering in the face of these humans. They had to adapt. Carrick summoned his tactical officers, laying out plans for a more aggressive campaign. If the humans wanted chaos, they would receive it 1,000-fold. Orbital strikes would no longer target military installations or infrastructure. They would focus on civilian population centers. Cities already under Dominion control would be purged to send a message. Every corner of this primitive planet would feel the Dominion's wrath. The assault began with brutal efficiency. From orbit, the Dren ships rained plasma fire on densely populated regions, leveling entire cities, and the scorched ruins of London, Beijing, and Sao Paulo glowed beneath a haze of ash. Drone swarms hunted human fighters in the wilderness, and biological agents were deployed to resistance in key regions. But it didn't work. For every city destroyed, more fighters emerged from the rubble, their hatred growing like wildfire. Human leaders began openly daring the Dren to attack further. "Burn it all," one broadcast challenged. The speaker's voice crackled with defiance. "You'll find us waiting in the ashes." And they did. Dren patrols began vanishing with alarming frequency. Forests, once deemed clear, were death traps filled with improvised explosives and ambushes. Ruins left after orbital bombardments became labyrinths of destruction, where humans moved like shadows, striking without warning. The Dominion's forces, so dependent on structure and precision, floundered in the chaos. Carrick's patience wore thin. The humans weren't just resisting. They were humiliating him. His name, once synonymous with invincibility, was now whispered with doubt among his own officers. He needed a decisive victory, something to show his troops and the humans that the Dominion was still in control. The perfect opportunity came in the form of a high-priority human resistance cell operating out of a bunker deep in the Rocky Mountains. Intelligence suggested this group was coordinating many of the global strikes against Dominion forces. Destroying them would crush the resistance. Carrax himself would lead the operation, determined to make an example of these insolent creatures. The assault began at dawn. Dren dropships descended through thick clouds, deploying squads of heavily armored soldiers to secure the perimeter. Carrax's personal guard advanced through the rocky terrain, their plasma rifles sweeping the cliffs for movement. Drones scouted ahead, scanning for traps. It was the most meticulously planned operation the Dominion had conducted since landing on Earth. The humans, of course, had planned for that. As the Dren advanced on the bunker entrance, they encountered no resistance, only silence. It wasn't until Carrax's forces breached the outer doors that the first explosions rocked the mountainside. Mines, buried under layers of rock, detonated in sequence, sending torrents of debris cascading down onto the invading force. Entire squads were buried alive, their screams muffled beneath tons of rubble. Carrax roared for his troops to advance, forcing his way through the chaos. Inside the bunker, the halls were eerily quiet. The walls bore crude graffiti mocking the Dren in the humans' indecipherable language. As Carrax moved deeper, he began to realize the trap he'd walked into. The resistance leaders weren't there. This wasn't a command center. It was a tomb. The first wave of human fighters struck in the darkness, armed with scavenged Dominion weapons and homemade explosives. They attacked with a ferocity that sent even Carrax's elite guard into disarray. Plasma fire lit the halls as the Dren fought to regroup, but the humans didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like predators. Every corner, every shadow held a new ambush. They weren't just trying to win. They wanted the Dren to suffer. When Carrax finally fought his way back to the surface, half his forces were dead. The mountainside was crawling with human fighters. Their shouts echoed across the battlefield, a cacophony of defiance that grated on his nerves. Above him, the skies darkened as human aircraft, patched together from Dominion wreckage, descended like vultures. "Fall back," Carrax ordered, his voice strained. "Regroup at the dropships." But even the retreat was a bloodbath. The humans had anticipated it, laying traps along the escape routes. Dropships exploded on their landing pads, one after another, as human rockets pierced their hulls. By the time Carrax reached the last functioning craft, only a handful of his soldiers remained. As the dropship ascended, Carrax stared down at the battlefield, his jaw clenched. The humans were cheering, their voices rising in a unified roar. They weren't just winning, they were reveling in their victory. Carrax had faced countless enemies, but none like this. These creatures didn't fight for survival alone. They fought for something more, something he couldn't understand. But it terrified him nonetheless. The Dominion wasn't just losing, it was being dismantled piece by piece. And Carrax knew it. Yet, even as the dropship entered orbit, he refused to consider the unthinkable. The war wasn't over. Not yet. The Dren fleet was in disarray. On board the command ship, Carrax stood rigid, watching as reports flooded in from across the globe. Resistance forces were attacking with unprecedented coordination, targeting the few strongholds the Dominion still controlled. Supply lines were obliterated, and morale among his troops had plummeted. For the first time in his career, Carrax faced the reality of defeat. He refused to accept it. The Dominion had survived countless wars. A single primitive species wouldn't be the one to undo centuries of conquest. Not while he still commanded the fleet. "Order all remaining ships to regroup," Carrax commanded. "We will raise this planet entirely if we must." Their defiance ends now. His officers hesitated. The thought of deploying the fleet's most destructive weapons, the planet-killer devices, banned by the Dominion itself, filled them with unease. But Carrax's glare silenced their objections. Orders were relayed, and across Earth's orbit, Dren vessels began arming their most devastating payloads. Then the alarm sounded. "Unidentified ships detected," an officer cried out. "They're human." Carrax turned sharply to the display. The humans had somehow cobbled together a fleet of their own, using scavenged Dominion technology and retrofitted spacecraft. What should have been a mismatched, uncoordinated flotilla instead moved with precision, breaking through the Dominion's orbital defenses with startling ease. As Carrax watched, His jaw tightened. The humans were targeting the fleet's most vulnerable points: communication relays, shield generators, even the planet killer devices before they could be deployed. Every maneuver was calculated, every strike devastating. They had become something more than the scattered resistance Carrick's had first encountered. They had become an army. The final blow came when a human flagship, a monstrous hybrid of Earth technology and Dominion engineering, emerged from behind the moon. It launched a weapon, a crude but enormous railgun, that pierced the Dominion command ship's shields and sent it spiraling toward Earth's surface. As the ship's alarms blared, Carrick sat silently, gripping the armrests of his chair. He had underestimated these humans from the beginning, and now he was paying the price. As the ship descended, flames engulfing its hull, Carrick closed his eyes. He didn't fear death. What haunted him was the realization that the Dren Dominion, for all its power and precision, had been defeated not by a superior enemy, but by one who refused to follow the rules of war. The humans had shown him something he'd never encountered in all his campaigns: the chaos of a species that fought not just to survive, but to defy, to destroy, and to endure. And as Earth's surface rushed to meet him, Carrick couldn't help but wonder if the Dren had ever truly been the galaxy's greatest power, or if they had simply never faced a real fight until now.